Good day and welcome to this very special National Science Month 2026 conversation on the future of science engagement in South Africa. My name is Saahier Parker, and today we'll explore the question of how do we build an inclusive, relevant, trustworthy science engagement ecosystem for all South Africans. Many South Africans feel disconnected from the world of science and science institutions. For today's conversation, we invite four perspectives from the world of policy, research, lived experience, and evidence. Science affects every aspect of our daily lives, and South Africa faces unique challenges when it comes to science engagement. Language diversity, unequal access to education, geographic barriers, and socio-economic differences all impact the ways in which South Africans access science. The rise of digital platforms, social media, community initiatives, and public conversations around science all impacts the ways in which communities engage with science in South Africa. Today we explore results from the South African Public Relationship with Science Survey to try and understand what science engagement should look like as we move towards 2030. Joining me today are distinguished guests from across South Africa. Dr. Sara Naicker is a STEM researcher at the HSRC and a supporter of women and youth in STEM. Ms. Zayaan Abdurahmaan is a distinguished young high school learner from Cape Town and represents the voices of young South Africans. Ms. Sylvia Hannan is a chief researcher at the HSRC's Public Relationship with Science Survey. Welcome and thank you all for joining us today. To begin, I'd like you each to reflect on one question. What is the single biggest barrier between South Africans and science today?
Thank you for having me, Saahier. I think one of the biggest barriers is not necessarily a lack of interest in science. It's rather unequal access to opportunities and meaningful engagement among the South African public. So we do see that South Africans value science. They also recognize the benefits as well as the risks that it can pose, but they don't always necessarily see how it impacts their daily life. So to promote trust and participation, we need relevance to the lives of individuals and communities.
I think the biggest barrier is not necessarily a lack of interest in science. In fact, one of the most important messages from the 2022 SAPRS survey is that South Africans generally value science and they see its potential. The promise of science and technology skills for young people was one of the strongest findings in the survey. It scored about 78 out of 100. So trust in scientists and universities were also relatively high. But when we look at people's actual opportunities to engage with science, the picture is very different. Community-based science engagement and attendance at science-related sites and events only scored about 23 out of 100. So for me, the real barrier is this gap between valuing science and having meaningful opportunities to access it, participate in it, and imagine yourself as part of it. And that gap is not experienced equally. So again, the 2022 SAPRS shows that participation is shaped by education, by socioeconomic circumstances, age, geography, and whether science centers and activities and these other opportunities are actually available nearby. We see other similar patterns appear in the South African schooling system. So the HSRC's Trends in International Mathematics and Science study, with TIMSS, shows that although science achievement has improved over time, it still remains low and unequal. So the achievement gaps are still strongly linked to socioeconomic background and school context. So by the time we ask a young person whether they can imagine a future in science for themselves, some of them have already had access to labs, good science teaching, technology, museums, mentors, and extracurricular activities, but many others have had very little exposure. So representation is an important part of this. It is harder to imagine yourself in science when you don't see people like yourself there, but representation alone can't overcome this unequal schooling, the limited resources, or the absence of kind of clear pathways into science. Kind of in a nutshell, I would describe the biggest barrier as the unequal distance between South Africans' interest in science and their opportunity to participate in it. And then our challenge becomes not only to persuade people that science matters, because many people already believe that. It's to make science genuinely accessible, relevant, and open to their participation.
For many young people, science can be challenging. So they prefer to take the easier path and not do math, physics, and life science, where you have to put your brain into it, study all the time, and stay focused. Most people prefer doing business where you can read and it's easy study content. But if you get an opportunity to do science, you should take it, because science is not only interesting, but it's also helpful. So you should really just take the risk.
Sylvia, the SAPRS survey provides a unique evidence base for understanding the ways in which the public engages with science. From your experience in the survey, what are the gaps between the ways in which scientists communicate and what the public actually wants from science engagement opportunities?
I think it's important for us to talk a little bit about the background of the survey. So the 2019 White Paper on Science, Technology and Innovation mandated the development of a survey that would be conducted every 5 years in South Africa to investigate the public's knowledge, attitude and engagement with science and technology. The Department of Science, Technology and Innovation is responsible for the South African Public Relationship with Science survey, and the survey was conducted for the first time by the HSRC in 2022 through the South African Social Attitude Survey, which is a nationally representative survey. There were almost 6,000 respondents across the country from various backgrounds. So we see that people want science that is practical, relatable, and speaks to real-world challenges that they are encountering in their daily lives. Citizens want to know how science affects issues that they see in their communities. For example, areas like jobs, health, safety, food security, and energy are important issues to the communities. Taking science to the people is really important. We want to make it accessible to different communities. Many individuals are exposed to science and engage with science that is not in their home language, and we need to make sure that everyone has the opportunity to be able to access science. Location is also a key consideration. There are more opportunities and there is more infrastructure available in urban areas than rural areas, and disadvantaged communities that are located further away from urban centres often don't have the opportunity to engage with science. We also see disparities in education, so everyone is not able to engage at the same level with science because of their educational backgrounds. Also, in an increasingly digital world, science is shared more and more online, and many people in the country do not have access to online platforms and resources. So this is an important consideration in relation to how we communicate science to the public. When we looked at the data, we didn't find big differences between men and women, but what we did see were disparities within these groups, looking at other socio-demographic factors. So we need to think about how we can help women as well as other marginalized communities to have the chance to engage with science. We also need to remember that engaging with science should start at an early age. We want all citizens to have the opportunity to engage with science from a young age and continue this across their lifetime. The future of engagement requires two-way dialogue between scientists and communities.
Thank you, Sylvia. Based on SAPRS insights, what does the ideal science engagement ecosystem look like in 2030?
An ideal science engagement system is one that is multilingual, community-led, and sensitive to public concerns. We also want an engagement system that is more accessible, that all members of the South African public can access. We need to think about and address barriers such as cost, location, availability of infrastructure and resources, and we want to make people more aware of the different science engagement opportunities that exist across the country. We also want easily accessible information. Visual representations are really important as they can help us to overcome some of the barriers to understanding, such as language and education level. Visual representations like images and videos can play a really important role in reaching different audiences. Digital communication has also become increasingly important in today's world, and citizens require access as well as digital literacy to effectively engage with digital science resources. So digital access is very costly. So we need to think about investing in data-free internet, low-cost or no-cost broadband. This has become increasingly important for government communication in recent years. And thinking about ways to increase access to digital science resources is particularly important for people who are outside of major metropolitan areas, as they often do not have the same level of access as those who live in these areas. We want citizens to play a key role in shaping scientific priorities as well as engagement initiatives, and this is crucial in developing a sustainable and effective science engagement ecosystem.
Sara, coming to you. How can science engagement break down stereotypes and ensure greater inclusivity in STEM fields?
I think science engagement can challenge two kinds of stereotypes. So stereotypes about who can be a scientist, but also what counts as science. So essentially what a scientific career can look like. So South Africa has made real progress in racial and gender representation over the years. In 2023, Black African students accounted for just over 82% of enrollments in public universities. Women made up almost 63% of university students and 65% of graduates. Importantly, women were not absent from science, engineering, and technology. They represented about 52% of the set enrollments and about 55% of the set graduates. So gender patterns within fields are more nuanced. Women are particularly strongly represented in education and the humanities, but they now also kind of comprise or constitute a slight majority in science, engineering, and technology overall. So that broad category can still conceal underrepresentation in fields like engineering and computing, but it shows us why we should examine the evidence field by field rather than repeat the general claim that women are absent from STEM. We also see progress in the research system as well. So the latest National Research and Development Survey found that women made up almost 48% of South Africa's researchers. The proportion of permanent Black African academic staff at public universities also increased from 27% in 2010 to about 43% in 2021. So I don't necessarily think the challenge can be reduced to simply showing young people more female or Black scientists. Representation still matters, particularly in specific disciplines and at senior levels, but there's deeper barriers that are often structural. These are like the quality of schooling, access to mentors and professional networks, funding, institutional culture, and opportunities to develop and progress. I think we also should recognize that transformation at senior levels takes time. So the demographic profile of students and early career researchers has changed much faster than that of professors and institutional leaders because seniority is kind of accumulated over many years. So naturally, there will be some lag. This doesn't mean that institutions should just wait. We need to support progression through mentorship, research funding, professional networks, leadership opportunities, and fair promotion processes. But there's also other ways in which we can support this. So maternity is one example of how structural conditions can affect progression. Scientific careers often reward uninterrupted productivity during the same years in which women have children. So pregnancy, maternity leave, and caregiving can then affect your publications, your fieldwork, your conference participation, networking, grant applications, and just general readiness for promotion. So these are not questions of ability or commitment, but they reflect how scientific careers are organized. So when we're saying support women, we mean more than just recruiting them. It's about recognizing maternity-related career interruptions fairly and allowing for appropriate flexibility in kind of grant and promotion timelines so that maternity leave doesn't create a lasting penalty on your professional career. I think more broadly, institutions should recognize parenting and caregiving responsibilities, including those of fathers. At the same time, I'm kind of cautious about treating transformation also only as a numbers exercise. So the aim is not to manufacture a particular picture of inclusion. It should be to remove unfair barriers and create a system in which talented people from all backgrounds have a fair opportunity to develop and experience their own experience that they need to progress. I think we also need to follow the evidence rather than rely on these fixed assumptions about who is disadvantaged. So in 2023, men made up only 37% of public university enrollments and 35% of university graduates. They also represented only 36% of TVET enrollment. So this kind of suggests that boys and young men's declining participation in post-school education also deserves some serious attention. But it doesn't mean that gender inequality has kind of simply reversed. So disadvantage appears at different points in the pathway. So young men are increasingly underrepresented in university and TVET enrollment and completion. Women are well represented in education settings, but still face poorer employment outcomes and barriers to progression. Overall, young people of both sexes face extremely difficult labor market. And I think the Q2 2025 employment stats said unemployment was about 15% among female graduates and 8.9% among male graduates. So it's a very complex picture. I think this is relevant to science engagement because we should not only encourage young people to enter particular fields. We also need to show to show credible routes from interest to training to experience and then employment. Otherwise, we risk promoting careers without addressing the lack of apprenticeships, workplace exposure, entry-level opportunities, and pathways into actual work. Finally, I think inclusion also means broadening both the pathways into science and our understanding of science itself. So science engagement often presents the university-trained scientist or engineer as the main destination. Electricians, artisans, mechanics, welders, engineering and lab techs, agriculture techs, renewable energy installers, information technology specialists, all apply scientific and mathematical and technological knowledge. We shouldn't treat these as lesser alternatives to university, but as skilled, valuable careers within the science and innovation system. So science is not limited to laboratories, to engineering and technology. It also includes health, human behavior, communities, the environment, policy, data, social science, and traditional knowledge. So when science engagement kind of presents this wider range of disciplines and pathways, more young people can recognize their interests, their practical abilities, and the questions that they care about in this broader range, and can see that they also have a place in science. And the 2022 SAPRS findings support this wider framework because it shows that transformation is not only visible, it's not only about who is visible in scientific organizations, it also concerns whose knowledge is recognized, who influences research agendas, and whose different forms of knowledge are valued.
Thank you for that, Sara. How do we then ensure that science engagement remains inclusive, particularly as much more communication shifts onto digital platforms?
In my view, we first need to kind of interrogate what we mean when we say science engagement should be inclusive. So inclusive for whom, included in what, and on whose terms. So we often use the word as though the meaning of it is self-evident, but different people face different barriers. So digital engagement can create real opportunities for inclusion. It can reach people who live far away from universities, museums, science centers, and it can also make science more accessible to people with disabilities through captions, transcripts, screen readers, compatibility things, sign language interpretation, and just the general ability to participate remotely. It can also help people who have caregiving responsibilities or those who can't easily attend events in person. At the same time, digital engagement can exclude someone who has limited data, unreliable connectivity, they're sharing devices, if there's low digital confidence. So inclusion is not simply about choosing between digital and face-to-face engagement. It's about understanding what kind of combinations work for different groups of people. Again, the 2022 SAPRS findings kind of illustrate this, although 76% of South Africans reported some form of internet access. The access and patterns of use varied considerably. Only about 5% actively accessed high amounts of science and technology information. The survey also found that people had greater trust in science and technology news on television and radio than in information shared through social media or chat applications. So this tells us that putting scientific information online doesn't automatically mean that people will either encounter it, trust it, or feel that it speaks to them. So we can't only measure inclusion through reach. So a campaign can attract thousands of views, but still reproduce the same inequality in whose voices are heard. I think we need to ask who can access the content, who understands and relates to it, who has an opportunity to respond to it, and then whose questions help shape the engagement. But we should be still asking who is missing. I think this also places a responsibility on scientists and research institutions. We can't describe engagement as inclusive simply because we've uploaded a report or we've held a webinar or placed information on social media. So researchers are trained, scientists, researchers are trained to produce journal articles, conference papers, technical reports. Many are not trained to communicate with different audiences in ways that connect with their interests and realities. Especially for young people, this doesn't mean making everything shorter or moving it onto the newest platform. Young people are not one homogeneous audience. We need to be able to communicate clearly without being patronizing, using relevant examples, and involving young people themselves in deciding which questions and formats matter to them. I think the other part of the challenge lies with scientists and research institutions as a system. So the system rewards publications, grants, and rapid productivity, and meaningful engagement takes time. It requires listening, returning to communities, building trust, and sustaining relationships even after your project or your event has ended. And this is not incentivized in the way we do our work. So we need more than better technology. We need researchers and scientists need communication skills. We need partnerships with professional communicators and community organizations. We need these institutional recognition systems for engagement as part of scientific work. South Africa's own science engagement strategy calls for greater access, but also for public participation, stronger engagement capacity, and stable funding for sustained activity. So we've recognized this in at the national level. Again, the 2022 SAPRS recommendations also emphasize using multiple channels, creating content that relates to different people's lived experiences, and overcoming the structural barriers to participation. I think ultimately our digital engagement should complement rather than replace old school radio, schools, libraries, TVET colleges, community organizations, and other face-to-face interaction. Again, the 2022 SAPRS found that people tended to trust science information from television and radio more than information on social media. So an inclusive system needs a mix of platforms. We need to choose it around people, choose it around the people we're trying to reach rather than around whichever technology is the newest or the easiest. I think in a nutshell, inclusion is not only about expanding the audience for science, it's about expanding who can participate in the conversation and who can shape it.
Zayaan, you recently have been a top performer at the South African Space Design Competition along with your colleagues, winning the South African leg of the competition and soon enough off on a plane to Orlando, Florida to compete in the global leg of this competition. You seem to know what young people would like from science, what they need to know about science, and where the sciences can benefit young people. Share with us some of your views about what young people need to know about science as we go towards the year 2030.
I was recently given the opportunity to be a part of a job sharing program at Stellenbosch University, where I met many other young students who were interested in science. We all got to work in the lab together, and it really showed that you need to have a passion for this. You need to have a passion for science. You got to speak to different types of scientists, and we really saw that it can change the way you view things. For me, I always wanted to become a biomedical engineer, and now after working in the science lab, I really want to become a molecular biologist. So it gives you a broader view on what science is. Science is not only one arm. There isn't only one thing to do in the science field. It's a very broad field. So I think that if you're interested in science, there's always something to do for you.
So Zayaan, you are going to be heading off to Kennedy quite soon, which is a tremendous honor. You also are a young person, which means you have grown up in a world that is digital, that engages science in a very different way to people that have come before you. What, in your view, is the way in which young people would like to encounter science as they move forward in life?
So I think that, as I previously said, science is a very broad field. So there are a lot of options to choose from, and it should get more exposure through social media, like on TikTok and Instagram, where you're on every day. You should be able to see more science videos, because a scientist once told me that a 1-minute video has more effect on them than a 300-page book has. So it really is just about how you see science and where you see it, because reading might not be interesting to you, but when you see that TikTok video about science and you're like, oh, this is cool, you learn something new every day, then you might be interested, like, maybe this is what I want to do someday. And that's where the social media plays a huge impact on how you get exposed to the science field.
Thank you to all our panelists. Now, as National Science Week becomes National Science Month, I'd like for each of you to share one hope for what National Science Month could become over the next few years.
So I've been involved in the National Science Month, what was previously National Science Week, for over 10 years at HSRC. And it's really important to promote this event, to show people how it can be relevant to their lives, and to get them involved in National Science Month. Interactive sessions that encourage engagement are something that we really need to aspire to, and we want to make these events inclusive so that all communities have the opportunity to engage with science. So I hope that National Science Month becomes a platform where all citizens can actively participate and have the chance to shape science engagement priorities for South Africa.
I think my hope is that National Science Month includes more community-led activities. So communities, schools, and young people also have an opportunity to identify the questions that matter to them, and help shape how we explore those questions. And it could make National Science Month feel less like science being brought to communities and more like science being developed with them.
I hope that National Science Month plays a huge role in how people view science. They need to see it as not only challenging, but they need to see it as relevant as well as interesting and interactive. They need to see that science is what makes up the world, and it can help with many different things. It's a very broad field with many different opportunities and options to choose from. For young women in STEM, I think science plays a huge role in what they want to do one day, because at my job sharing program, they were mostly women, and it shows that they're interested in what they want to become. They're motivated to do what they want to do. I was also at WIPISA lunch, which is Women in Physical Sciences, and it showed me that when it comes to women, they're always motivated in what they want to do. They always set their mind to something and they always try to reach the goal. So I think that it plays a huge role in what you want to become one day as a woman, and you can really change the way younger people view things.
Today's discussion highlighted several powerful themes. First, South Africans are interested in science, but engagement must become more relevant, more inclusive, and more accessible. Second, communication must move beyond simple information sharing towards creating meaningful dialogues between science and society. Third, representation matters, particularly for young people and women considering STEM career pathways. Fourth, policy, research institutions, and communities have a role to play in building trust and public participation in the sciences. And finally, the future of science engagement in South Africa depends on our ability to meet people where they are, in their languages, in their communities, and in all their digital spaces. As we celebrate National Science Month 2026, let us remember that science belongs to us all. On behalf of the HSRC, I'd like to thank all our panelists and you, our viewers, for joining us today. Until the next time, take care.